All right, Congressman Seth Moulton is back with us on the podcast, giving us a couple minutes. Congressman Mike Leon, thank you so much for hopping back on the pod with us.
Great to be back on.
You know, Congressman, it's so fitting to have you on right now. There's so much happening, not only domestically, but internationally. I want to get into a bunch of it with you and leave you some space at the end to talk about the Veterans Town Hall that you're going to be doing this coming Friday. And one thing I did want to get in with you was you guys on social media have been very vocal about Speaker Mike Johnson, assault weapons bans, things of that nature, everything that happened last week up in Lewiston, Maine. Obviously, as a former veteran, I heard you say something on an interview about, hey, I needed these weapons of war when I was in Iraq. We don't need them for people that want to commit acts like this or people that equate it to hunting for all intent and purpose. What do you make of everything that happened last week in Lewiston, Maine? And then what is it that you are specifically calling on Speaker Johnson to do?
I mean, let's just start with the fact that this is an unbearable tragedy. I mean, so many lives cut short. As a father of two little girls, I read about so many young dads who were just gunned down, and their mothers are going to have to explain why daddy's not coming home. And yet this unbearable tragedy is like just on repeat across America all the time. There have been 566 or something mass shootings, defined as 4 or more people shot in America just this year. That's crazy. 566. You don't hear about them all because there are just so many. We're so used to this. It's an absolutely absurd situation. It doesn't happen in any other country in the world. And you think about all the people who were killed on September 11th, about 3,000 people. Well, in just the last 5 years, that many people have been killed in mass shootings. And we've done nothing. We did so much as a country to respond to September 11th, some of it good, some of it bad. But the point is we mobilized as a nation. And yet after the same number of people have died at the hands of guns, here at home, we've done nothing. It's just dereliction of duty. It is un-American to not be able to respond to a tragedy like this. And yes, I bring my own experience as a veteran, someone who's used guns, someone for whom guns have saved my life. I wouldn't be here today if not for the assault rifle that I had with me in Iraq. But I don't need that to be a citizen in America. I don't need it to hunt a deer. If you say you need an assault rifle to go hunting, you don't need an assault rifle, you need a shooting lesson. In Iraq every day, I also had 2 grenades strapped to my chest. Those are weapons of war. Now, if I told you that I had 2 grenades on me right now, you probably wouldn't like that. Even though I would be perfectly confident that I wouldn't blow myself up. Over 4 tours in Iraq, I never blew myself up with my own grenades. But the point is that we as a society have decided that you're not allowed to carry grenades around because they're weapons of war. That doesn't violate the Second Amendment to say you can't have grenades. So this is just common sense that we should not have weapons of war on our streets or in our schools. You don't have to get rid of the Second Amendment to support this view. And that's why the vast majority of Americans, over 80% of Americans, want background checks on guns. A similarly high number want an assault weapons ban. And even more remarkable, the majority of Republicans, upwards of 70% of Republicans, upwards of 70% of NRA members want these common sense restrictions to keep our homes and schools safe. Because you don't have to be a Democrat to want to be able to send your kids to school and know that they won't get shot. And yet, Speaker Mike Johnson, just part of the mold. A Republican who doesn't follow even the Republican polling. He just follows the edicts of the NRA and his extremist party members and just won't do a thing. Won't do a thing. That's political cowardice. And it's getting Americans killed.
Representative Moulton, you just fed into the follow up there because I was going to ask you about, and by the way, the grenade analogy is something I have never heard before somebody equated to. I always equate it to golf clubs because that's what I know. Grenades and weapons of war. So I'm glad that you used that analogy. But tell us a little bit about Mike Johnson for people that are watching this, listening to this, that maybe are not always following the politics and rhetorics of people that are members of the House of Representatives. You happen to know who he is. Now you've had a chance to kind of talk to him about certain things. You're calling on him to do certain things. What do we know about him, or what can you tell more the American people about him?
Well, first of all, if you don't know Mike Johnson, don't feel bad because most Americans don't know him. Most Americans have never heard of him. Most members of Congress don't know Mike Johnson. He's been a really obscure member of the Republican Party, but he has always been known as a nice guy. And that might seem like a sort of throwaway term, but I mean, these days in politics, never dismiss someone who's actually nice. Ron DeSantis, for example, is known in the halls of Congress for being just a first-rate uh, jerk. I mean, I'm being polite and saying jerk, um, but Mike Johnson actually is respected among his fellow Republicans, even is respected among those of us who, have a locker near him in the gym for just being a decent person. And he presented himself to Congress and the world in his acceptance speech, essentially his first speech as the new speaker, by saying, this is my family background. This is who I am. I'm a man of faith. I'm a man of principle. I'm a man who believes in American values. And it was a fundamentally very humble speech. That's what you want out of a leader. And then the next day, I saw him in the locker room, as I often do in the morning. And he said to me, we've got to find ways to work together because that's what the American people want. They're tired of this bitter partisanship. And of course, he's right. And I encouraged him and I want to work with him if we can. But then just a few days after that, his first major piece of legislation to put before Congress, he's politicized the Israel issue. He's politicized funding for Ukraine, the border, and the immigration debate, and funding for the investments we need to deter a war in the Pacific, things that have been bipartisan priorities to some degree. And he clearly is unwilling to do anything about guns. So, I mean, what we're seeing now is the serious limits of his leadership.
I want to stay on. Unfortunately, you know a lot about war. You mentioned your service in Iraq, and obviously everything that's playing out with the Israel-Hamas war. A listener had asked in a question that I want to clean up for you here on this show because it was semi diatribe. But the question was really around how do we talk about this duality that is happening with this war? That Israel is now doing a ground invasion with weapons that we've supplied, yet the US is also calling on aid to be provided for citizens of Gaza. So it's almost like we're making the mess, but we're also providing the bounty towels to pick up the mess. And so people are struggling out there. I've seen friendships dissolve in the last couple of weeks because of everything that's played out. And it's very simplistic to call out Hamas for being a terrorist organization, for the hostages to be returned, to vilify these acts that they've committed, while also there's that balancing act of what's happening right now in Gaza and the humanitarian crisis that's playing out. For you, as a former veteran, as now a member of Congress, what do you make of it all from October 7th until now, or even predating that?
Well, first of all, this is a horrific situation for everybody involved. Um, a Jewish life is no more important than a Palestinian life, and a lot of Jews and Palestinians have lost their lives and are going to lose their lives in the days ahead with the way this is going. And so let's first just acknowledge the terrible human tragedy of that. Wars are always tragic, they're always horrific. And I mean, in a way, that's why none of this surprises me at all. I mean, it's a sad reality of war that you kill people at the same time as you're trying to help others, that you need to provide weapons at the same time as you need to provide aid. We saw that over 20 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. What I've been really encouraging the Israeli government to do as they prosecute this war is to learn the lessons from the mistakes we made in Iraq and Afghanistan. Don't repeat our mistakes, because far too many Iraqis and Afghans died in the course of those wars. And even though you go to Iraq today and it's actually pretty prosperous and happy, and there are a lot of Iraqis who actually thank us for getting rid of Saddam and giving them a semblance of democracy. And of course, millions of Afghan girls had a glimpse of a future when they were able to go to school, something they weren't allowed to do before and are not allowed to do now since we left. So war is always complicated, but let's just start with the basic facts here about Israel-Hamas. First of all, there's never an excuse for terrorism. It's downright evil, and the barbarism that Hamas exacted on innocent Israelis is truly difficult to contemplate. True, unadulterated evil, as President Biden has said. Now, in response to that, Israel is going after Hamas, something they have a right to do, a national security responsibility to do, in the same way that we went after the terrorists who perpetrated 9/11. But how you go after them, how you wage that war, how you carry out that fight really matters. And Israel has to follow the laws of war, the same laws of war that Hamas broke, disregarded, threw in the waste bin. One evil doesn't allow another. And so while Israel has a right, I would argue even a responsibility, to remove the Hamas terrorists, the threat that they are to their nation and their people, they also have a right and a responsibility to protect innocent Palestinians. And the point that I've made from my experience fighting in the counterinsurgency battles of Iraq is that if Israel doesn't make the case to innocent, peace-loving Palestinians that they shouldn't want to live under a Hamas terror regime themselves, and there are a lot of Palestinians who fit into this category. There's data, there's polling that shows that a lot of the Palestinians in Gaza do not like living under a terrorist regime. But Israel has to give them an alternative. They have to be able to provide a better future than Hamas, or else when they go in to take out Hamas, if they kill innocent civilians, as they already have been doing, they're just going to recruit more Hamas terrorists in the process. Israel will be right back where they began, or maybe even in a worse situation. So I guess the long answer to your question is that all these things can be true. Hamas can be evil, but Israel also has a responsibility to follow the law of warfare. They can go after Hamas terrorists, but they should not be killing innocent Palestinians. And in fact, killing innocent Palestinians hurts their ability to achieve the ultimate peace and stability that the people of Israel want, the peace-loving people of Gaza want, and frankly, the whole world wants, I guess, with the exception of some terrorist groups in the region. I mean, none of us want to see a wider Middle Eastern war, and I think that the vast majority of people in the world want to somehow, someday, see peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
I wanted to shift back because, well, actually, you know what? Let me stay on the follow-up for that, because what should the U.S. be doing from a support standpoint for allies or countries that are going through these type of conflicts? Because we're seeing right now a couple different wars between Russia and Ukraine, and Israel and Hamas, and the U.S.'s semi-involvement in the Ukraine one, and then what we're doing on the Israeli side. What should the typical U.S. response be as a former veteran, now a member of Congress?
Well, there are a few principles. I mean, first of all, we stand by our allies. Second of all, we stop terrorism and the rampages of dictators in their tracks. And the reason why it's so important that we, as a free democracy here in the United States, send a message to the rest of the world that if you're a dictator, you can't just invade your neighbor. And if you're a terrorist, you can't just kill innocent people in terror attacks, is because that's important, not just for the security of places like Israel and Ukraine. It's important for our national security. It's important to send a message all over the world that that kind of, I mean, at its just most clinical term, violation of international law, that kind of barbarism, the slaughtering of innocent people in wars that don't need to be fought, that will not stand. We will not allow that to happen because we don't want that happening to us. And so there's a very real connection between our willingness to stand by Ukraine and stop Vladimir Putin and our stated or our sort of ambiguous willingness to stand by Taiwan in the Pacific under the threat of an invasion by China. Because if China thinks they can get away with invading Taiwan, then they could very well go ahead and do that and literally start World War III, that will lead to the deaths of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, including a lot of Americans, should China and America ever get in a war. And the name of peace is deterrence. It's deterrence. It's saying to not just Vladimir Putin, but to Xi Jinping, you cannot just take over a neighbor because you want to. It's saying to terrorist organizations like Hamas, you can't do this and get away with it. Deterrence matters for peace, and that's what we're trying to do. Of course, actually doing it, it's hard, it's complicated, and we don't always get it right. And that's why when people are concerned about how Israel is carrying out this war, that they should be voicing those concerns. I've been voicing those concerns. That's why I wrote this op-ed on CNN.com that explained, like, don't make the mistakes we made in Iraq and Afghanistan, one of which is you've got to have a plan for the day after. You can't just solve this with military means alone or by military means alone. You have to provide a political future for these people. And candidly, Prime Minister Netanyahu hasn't done that yet. He hasn't explained that political future to the Palestinians. He hasn't even explained it to his own troops, many of whom are going to lose their lives if they're thrown into this hellish urban warfare in Gaza.
Yeah, I think in that piece, or it may have been somebody else too, said you can't bomb your way out of this, and I thought it was just so fitting because
That's
it
right.
is true. So I wanted to ask you before the end of the year here in 2023, as we're about to head into 2024 in a political cycle. Obviously, we're approaching this deadline on November 17th. As we're recording this, nothing has happened there on the government potentially being shut down. We may get another CR for another 45 days. What are some of your priorities as you finalize the year here and keeping the government open? What else are some of the things that Congressman Seth Moulton is kind of making a priority for the end of the year?
There's so many things that we need to do. We've got to provide this funding package that the majority of Democrats and Republicans agree on, providing aid for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and improvements at the border. Now, of course, the details matter in all of this, but that's something that's a priority. Certainly just keeping the government open. I mean, the economy will go into a tailspin if we let the government shut down, something that a lot of Republicans are perfectly willing to do. We've got to stop that. But there's also so much more we should be doing. We should be investing a lot more in education, for example. We don't talk about that enough because there are so many fires that we have to put out day to day. But America's falling behind because we have not modernized our education system. It's not as equitable as it should be. If you're rich, you're pretty much guaranteed to get a great education in America. If you're poor, it's a crapshoot, and that's wrong. That's not freedom of opportunity, a hallmark of the American dream. We've got to fix our immigration system. It's not just about border security. It's about giving people a pathway to citizenship. I mean, even most Republican voters agree that dreamers should be allowed to stay. They should be allowed to truly live the American dream. And yet they can't do so under our broken immigration system. I want a lot of immigrants to come here. I just want them to come here legally. And that's something that we should all agree on. We need to work on our infrastructure. I talk about this a lot because I'm a champion of high-speed rail. It's just pathetic that America has no high-speed rail, no real high-speed rail in all of America, when almost every other developed country in the world, you can go right downtown and get on a train going 200 miles an hour to your destination, faster than flying, for any sort of short to medium distance, much faster than driving. I mean, we're just missing out. So there are so many things that we need to do to invest in our country, invest in our future, invest in our kids that we're not doing right now because of this political paralysis in Washington. And I don't want to lose sight of that. While, of course, we're talking about this funding deadline, we're talking about the threat of Republicans again shutting down the government. But gosh, like, let's get out of our own way here. Of course, I mean, that's just a matter of course. You don't shut down your own government. It's ridiculous.
Right.
We should be talking about the investments we need to make in our future.
Well said. I want to give you some space before I let you go here, Congressman, and I can't thank you enough for giving us some time here. But you have a town hall that's coming up this week, a veterans town hall that you're going to be doing. You guys have been posting about this on social media. Tell us and our audience a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so this is an amazing idea that actually comes from American Indian tradition, where warriors return to the communities that they fought for, the communities where we grew up and were raised, and explain to everybody back home what we went through in war. It's meant to be a cathartic healing process for veterans, many of us who, of course, come back with post-traumatic stress after going through some of the most horrific experiences on Earth. But also it's meant to be cathartic for the rest of the community, to try to understand us, to try to understand the scars of war and how they've influenced our lives ever since. A lot of Americans support veterans. They want to do right by veterans. They want to help veterans, but they don't understand how to do that. They don't understand what we're all about. So the idea is veterans come to this town hall, and most of the people in the audience will not be veterans, but we just share a little vignette, a short story, 10 minutes, and talk about how that experience in war has impacted our lives back home. It's been an extraordinary, it's probably the thing I'm most proud of in Congress. I mean, just an extraordinary experience for these communities because it helps communities heal. And we need a lot of healing in America today.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, we leave it there. Congressman Seth Moulton from the great state of Massachusetts. I can't thank you enough for hopping on the program, giving us a couple minutes. Continued success to you, sir. Please stay safe.
Hey, thanks very much for having me. Take care.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.